Hello and welcome to QTV's look back at the year 2020. Quite an amazing year. And this time it's not the week in review, but it's the review of the year. And with me to look back over the last 12 months or so, I have two very, very special guests. To my immediate right, I have Madam Fatou Kiné Kantara, who lectures in psychology at the University of the Gambia. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And to my left, I have my colleague here at QTV, Mr. Mamadou Mbodj. Mr. Mbodj, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ade.
And we're going to go through about 14 stories or so. So if you're used to watching the Week in Review, this is an extended one of that. And don't forget, we can't possibly cover everything. Now, to go on with the program. Many years, we can look back over a year, maybe 4 or 5 years down the line, and you say, I don't remember when such and such happened. Trust me, that is unlikely to happen with 2020. Everybody who has lived through this year has had reason to remember it. What am I talking about? Of course, COVID-19. It has defined and redefined our lives across the world. And so here in the Gambia, we first became aware of it around March. And here is a video which tells us how it was first announced in this country. Have a look at this.
I'd like to inform the public of a confirmed case of COVID-19 who is currently in isolation and receiving excellent care at the Medical Research Council Clinic in Fajara. This is different from the 2 suspected cases from Indonesia that were tested to be negative. With this announcement marks the first case of COVID-19 in the Gambia. This particular confirmed case is a lady in her 20s who returned from the UK on Sunday through the Banjul International Airport.
You heard the Minister of Health there. Madam Kintara, if I could come to you first. Do you remember when you first heard that we had our first confirmed case?
Yes, it was a very difficult evening when I had this. And my, the children and my grandchildren were really upset. We were all scared. It was frightening. It was a very difficult moment because this is the first time we've heard of COVID-19,
Sure.
and we didn't know what it was. And since the disease was deadly disease, therefore it was a very frightening,
Sure.
very frightening day, very frightening.
And Mr. Mbodj, what are your recollections of that day? I mean, I think Madam Kintara has kind of summed it up. We were all scared, myself included, I won't lie. What was it like for you?
I suspect that we more or less heard it together because we were here at work.
Yeah.
But for some of us, remember, we were sort of expecting it.
Indeed.
There was nothing special about here. It had already started elsewhere, and it was in Senegal. It was just a matter of time before we announced our first. So, in a sense, one wasn't that surprised, but yes, the apprehension, the anxiety, uncertainty, nobody knew, anybody can fall victim to it. Absolutely, these were all very difficult times, scary times.
And I think you used the word upsetting, Madam Kantara, because we'd heard all the stories from the countries that had it.
Yes.
We'd heard of the people falling ill, and we'd heard of deaths.
Yes.
And so we thought, as Mr. Mbodj says, it was in Senegal, it was inevitable that, with, to use the term, but we use it, porous borders that we have with our neighbor Senegal, it was inevitable if they had it that we were going to get it.
Yeah, it was. It's just one of those things that you in your mind it's like, well, maybe we're not going to have it. For some reason, Gambia is special because there was Ebola and we never got Ebola.
Exactly.
So I was thinking like that. I was saying, well, there is hope because Ebola was round and and we managed to escape it.
Sure.
So I was hoping that this was going to be one of those. Yeah. So that's why it was a bit upsetting and it was frightening.
Sure.
Because obviously, it meant that our movements were going to be restricted, school was going to close. There were a lot of issues. So it was a frightening moment for me, I think, because I was not sure what was going to happen next.
I think the uncertainty, again, what Kantara has just mentioned, because, it's like fake news went into overdrive. We started hearing stories that Africa might not get it because of our hot temperatures.
Exactly.
Did you hear those stories?
Absolutely. And afterwards, remember one of those words that emerged out of the COVID, the COVIDiots.
Yes,
so I started calling these things, these
quite.
COVIDiotic statements, as it were. Absolutely, we had all sorts. Gambia was blessed,
Yes.
and Africa because of the heat,
The
the
heat
sun.
and so on.
Even though, to some extent, remember, from experts as well, they were speculating.
Sure.
Why is it that we haven't seen the same similar spike as it were? That's what we're seeing in Europe. They said, maybe the weather, maybe this, maybe that, which fueled perhaps
Yes, yes,
that belief going there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that was why we were constantly on the airwaves telling people no. I mean, we had to challenge this apocryphal stuff.
Absolutely.
So quite unbelievable, really.
Yes, I mean, Mr. Bush says unbelievable. And, at the beginning I said it defined and redefined. I mean, one of the things that it forced us to do was that you would go to premises of, commercial entities, and there were wash stations and so on. And interestingly, some of the people who left here to go to the UK, when they contacted us, said when they got there was none of that.
None of that.
You could walk into a shop without hand sanitizers, without washing your hands or anything like that. But it forced us to adopt certain habits that weren't necessarily bad. Am I right in saying so?
Absolutely. I think that the hygienic factor, because there are a lot of people who were careful about washing their hands when they came home.
Sure.
But with the COVID-19, everybody was extra careful, and everybody was conscious about that. And so I think out of every bad situation, there is something good that came out of it. So people are more aware of hygiene, and people are more aware of how fragile and how interconnected we are.
Yeah.
The world is really interconnected. I mean, it's if something happens somewhere, it doesn't mean that it cannot happen here. And so I think that in a way it has its negative, but it has a lot of positive things, I think.
And for you, positives and negatives of the whole scenario with COVID? I mean, Madam Kantara talks about the very word I was going to use of interconnectedness. This has brought it home in unbelievable fashion how interconnected we are. We cannot, no country or nation or continent can be an island anymore. We are too interconnected for that.
Absolutely.
But positives and negatives as far as you are concerned?
Absolutely. And this interconnectedness, we call it globalization. It wasn't somebody's decision. This is the thing. I think technology really forced it on us.
Yes,
it started with the plane, and that's you just can't help it. So we need to understand that we are part of a larger sea, part of a larger whole, and there's really nothing anybody can do about that, but simply to adapt to it. And also perhaps as African countries, suddenly we've realized that, God, we need to do something about our state and how it is run.
Yes.
I mean, perhaps this time we are lucky. COVID-19, even though it's highly infectious, but not as deadly perhaps as Ebola. You know what I mean? It could have happened differently and we were completely exposed. Perhaps this is a warning. Because we've been warned that we're going to have lots of coronavirus. We've had MERS, SARS, we've had them, and we will be having these things in the future. So perhaps it's a wake-up call.
And I think the point you made there about the wake-up call for us around our weak systems, certainly our health systems, whereas there'd been underspending in sort of health provision and health service delivery. All of a sudden, they realized that this is what it can lead you to. You're exposed.
Yes.
All of a sudden, people were rushing to refurbish old hospitals, old clinics, in case they needed to take. These should have been refurbished or up to standard in the first place anyway.
Exactly. I think it's a wake-up call for everyone, the medical sector especially. I think it's a wake-up call, I mean, for them, because I think we took a lot of things for granted, for health matters. But with this COVID-19, I think people are more aware and people are more careful, and and in all sectors, the health sector, the social welfare, everybody who is interconnected with people now are taking things more seriously than before.
Thanks for that. And I'm sure to the viewers, you'll understand why we probably spend more on this than anything, because as I said, COVID-19 defined and redefined the year. We can't ignore it. And so on to our very next story, which again, is to do with COVID-19, and as we go through, you'll see that most of the program's stories are to do with that. Have a look at this one. It's the president making an address to the nation.
All heads of government institutions, parastatals, private enterprises, and other institutions have been instructed to scale down their activities, with minimal staff to perform basic services. Where feasible, staff can work from home. At the private sector level, all non-essential services are declared suspended with immediate effect. Only essential services, such as emergency medical services, sale of essential items and commodities, will continue.
Exactly the point I was making there about this defining and redefining. We heard His Excellency the President there talking about suspensions of all sorts of things. One of the things which was most vivid for me was that, you know, as a nation, we're used to criticizing the government, including the President, for going off to meetings all over the world. Politicians and people who work for parastatals going off to meetings. All of a sudden, they were forced to hold those meetings virtually. Zoom was the one that kind of, the world did not collapse. Again, I chose that clip because he mentions, again, some of the things and some of the things that had to close. I mean, what's your own view of how that has forced us to change certain habits?
Absolutely, and your thing about the world did not collapse. Here again, we go back to technology. It was technology that allowed it to move on. Yes, with President Barrow and the new regulations, the guidelines, obviously all of them from the WHO. Remember that even in the beginning, some people were saying that couldn't we take the general principles to see how we can apply it here?
Yeah.
Because we knew afterwards regarding the implementation, you know, saying it is one thing, but what you implement, that will really give you the outcomes that you want and stuff like that. So we saw that with the implementation, it was very difficult. I mean, yes, you advise some of these institutions to try to work from home and all of that, but we know that the vast amount of people who work, the whole work is informal. Yeah. So that was the thing really to tackle. Yes. That informal economy that you really cannot control, and that was really the key to tackle. But in the end, what happened? The enforcement was weak. Yes, in spite of what he said the right things.
Yes. For you, the enforcement was weak?
Yeah, I think that because there were a lot of mixed messages about COVID, and a lot of people were going into social media, listening to other things, and so a lot of people did not take it seriously. I mean, the schools obviously were forced to close down, which was difficult for parents, but you know, the markets, and so I could just feel the atmosphere. I mean, it was a quick fright, and then people started going back to normal, as if nothing happened. Yes, you know, as if nothing happened. And I found that a bit difficult sometimes, you know, because people did not take it seriously. And I think it's because of a lot of mixed messaging, mixed messages that people were receiving, you know, from here and there.
Yeah, this is it, and I think that's the point, isn't it? That you heard messages from home, you heard messages from government, from the President's office, from the Health Ministry. But nowadays, we talk about interconnectedness. Everybody's on WhatsApp, they're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, and they're seeing other messages that actually contradict the messages that we were being told here.
That's precisely it. This is where, that is why at emergencies, you need the leader to be authoritative. Because, you know, you'll be competing. This is the reality now with social media. We just better take it on board. You know what I mean? Even though we try to advise people to do the decent thing, to observe certain proprieties and that sort of thing in our relationship. But you know that there will be some who wouldn't. And the nature of the human being. So let's just get real. This is going to be the case. So now the strategy must be, how do we counter this? And to some extent they try. You have to come out fighting, bring out the facts, and the media having a huge role to play in this. So all of these played to sort of create quite skeptical. A good number of our people were quite skeptical of what the government was saying, and the conspiracy theorists came out, and you know how we are perhaps sub-psychology or psychologists here can help us with our relationship with the West.
Sure, sure.
There is that play as well at the bottom. You know, they're always trying to fool us, or they're trying to do this.
They're still getting it up to this week.
So that historical colonial baggage at the back there.
Absolutely.
So all of these things, you know, came together in a cocktail.
Perfect storm. Well, thank you for that, both of you. And now on to our next story. And again, as you heard in the message from His Excellency the President, non-essential services had to close down. So business was very, very greatly impacted by COVID-19. And here is a clip that actually says how business was trying to fight back, or at least help in the fight back. Have a look at this.
A fundraising exercise built as businesses against COVID-19 is the brainchild of the GCCI to support the government's plan to mitigate the economic and social impacts of the coronavirus. The GCCI president expressed his gratitude to those who have donated and encouraged others to follow their examples.
I want to use the opportunity to thank all those that have contributed, big or small. Everything is appreciated. We have, after the last telethon, some other donations that would be announced on the third telethon that would take place on Tuesday on all media, online, on satellite. So we are asking all Gambians to rally behind this effort. Already the monies that have been raised, we have started spending those funds. We've done some work at the sanatorium to enable the first coronavirus patient to be housed at the sanatorium.
There you had Idris Amas Job, president of the GCCI, talking. Madam Kantara, I'm one of those who I criticize business a lot because most businesses here, not just here, but in many countries, you go to their website or you go to a page about them and they talk about corporate and social responsibility. But when you quiz them down to the ground, well, what exactly are you doing to fulfill those obligations? There's very little that. But this was an instance, surely, of business stepping up to the plate and saying, look, government can't do this alone, let's pitch in.
Let's pitch in and help.
And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, as you said earlier, COVID has brought a lot of things out. And when I heard about that, the business community coming together to help government, I thought that was very encouraging for a change. I thought that was very good in terms of supporting government, because government couldn't do everything. And business coming out, I think, gave people the impression that, you know, this is
we're all in it together.
Role. Yeah, we are all in it together, because everybody is sort of chipping in and helping, and you know, I thought that was very good. I thought that was good.
And for you, Mr. Mboj, I know business came out, as we heard Idris Amas Job there talking about they refurbished the sanatorium. But do you think government used business and the business expertise enough in actually delivering on their sort of relief packages, for example?
I suspect not really. I mean, they wouldn't say that, of course, but not. Of course, possibly they had sort of liaised with them somehow. They had been contacted, but possibly they should have had a more central.
Because there are certain skills that businesses have.
Bring in. Absolutely. Because in many ways, in the first place, a lot of people have said that once we've had this COVID, there should have been a national response team, slightly separate from government.
Well, we almost had that, didn't we?
Absolutely, but it came much later.
Yes,
exactly. There was a committee within the cabinet, and
which
of course,
Alassane Senghor was briefly appointed, and then he resigned.
And then when he resigned. Yeah. So this is said, you know, it took a lot of countries, you know, in the world, you know, on the hop, as it were. Nobody was prepared for it and all of that. Sure. But yet there was a responsibility to have a more rational response to it. So one might fault the government in many ways on how it responded, the sort of people it brought in. So in fact, that said, he could have used the business community more in responding to this, and perhaps helping. They will help in coming up with a strategy in many ways to help to deal with it. But it doesn't seem as if there was any strategy as such. One was just responding to things as they happen.
But finally, on this one, do you agree with Madam Kantara Kantara, that it was a good thing that business did step up in the way that they did?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the telethon, I mean, the target was what, 20 million?
That's
they
right,
didn't
yes,
quite get
yes,
that, but
yes,
they got
close.
many millions. Even though perhaps on the other side, one will say this, we've seen a few people who are the sellers of rice and all that, inflating the price. There's always another part to business, this little what they do. A few of them were also prosecuted. So that's it generally, just as I think Albert Camus said really in The Plague. These things generally, they bring out the best in us.
Yes,
It's quite interesting. So in that way, you'll have a few, rotten apples there, but generally it was fantastic.
As Mr. Mbok says, Mr. Mbok says, brings out the best in us. And now, Madam Kantara kind of briefly touched on this, the effect of COVID-19 on education. Have a look at this.
Schools are closed, but learning continues.
It is called distant teaching and learning. After schools were suspended last week due to the coronavirus, the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education took a swift decision to minimize the disruption to education. They aim to do this by keeping students busy watching TVs or listening to radios for their normal lessons during the 3-week suspension of schools.
There is a subtraction, and likewise there's a multiplication between the 3 and the Q. So this will definitely pass or qualify as an expression.
In a televised statement, the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education describes the measure as an emergency response strategy.
We strongly hope that this would help to mitigate the impact of the 72 hours of contact that will be lost within the next 15 days.
The minister there, according to our colleague Choi, described it as an emergency response. As someone who is in education, how did it impact you before we go into kind of the generalities of it and your institution?
It was, students were completely disappointed, and obviously families were disappointed. And I was not particularly happy about the response because I don't think that they looked at, I mean, again, as you said, COVID brought something out. And the revelation of what happens with students, because this was not being, I mean, not all the students were benefiting from this. Not all the students, because most of the students didn't have television, they didn't have radio, and so therefore it was just a few students, and so that was really not effective, and so I think that the response could have been a bit different. I think they should have taken their time instead of just coming up with that. Take their time, look at it and see what was the need. A quick response. Just find out what is the basic need in every region and then come up with something that everybody can use at the same time. But I think they jump into that conclusion without doing the study to find out. And in the end, it was few students benefiting and some were not benefiting. And even those who were benefiting, it was difficult for them to focus on what they were doing at the home.
Your thoughts, Mr. Mboch, on that?
Quite interesting there, because what you seem to be saying was that the response strategy wasn't quite consultative enough. They had not consulted. And this is it. This was always the fear, and lots of students were saying it. And for this to work, I mean, the technology is one thing, about energy lights going off here and there, and even we know that at home, when you are a certain age, you really need a facilitator around. You need that human being, that live person to help learning. Learning is very difficult. So one is not quite sure how much they had taken from the TV programs they were having and all the rest of it. So what was the impact? I once asked a Ministry of Education official whether there had been done any proper studies to know precisely what the impact was. But I'm not sure they've measured it. We really do not know. But from the anecdotal stuff we are getting, we've had a good number of complaints, I have to say. Really.
Yes, and I don't want to add to those complaints, but I have to say that there's a particular reason I chose the clip that we played, because I know this came upon us as a surprise, but you had the example there of the teacher pointing to the board and talking about this sum. Now, if you were listening to the radio, you did not see the sum. And so that was, I think, some of the lessons learned from that. And those were some of the complaints where they were always making the assumption that the person who was receiving the tuition could see exactly what was going on. But, a nice try, but I think some very, very lessons learned. And of course, as my teachers used to say, must try harder. So we'll take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll have 4 more stories. Don't go away. Join us after this break. And welcome back. You're watching QTV's Look Back at the Year 2020. I'm your host, Ade Darami, and to my right, I have Madam Fatou Kine Kantara. Thanks again for your intervention so far.
Thank you.
And to my left, I have Mr. Mahmoud Mboj, my colleague here at QTV. Mr. Mboj, thanks again also to you. Now, we've covered 4 stories, and we have several more to go, about 10 more to go, and so we'll crack on. Again, I said this is a year defined and redefined by the coronavirus, COVID-19. And this is a country that depends very, very heavily on its tourist industry. So what happened when coronavirus hit? Let's have a look at this.
Most of the tourists confided to us that, looking at the current coronavirus statistics, Gambia is safer than their own countries. However, they say that because no one can predict when the pandemic will be over, it is better to be home where the health system is more advanced. Cyrus Johnson, a U.S. citizen who was teaching in the Gambia for the past 10 months, said he would prefer to go back home and stay with his family.
But, coronavirus is getting very bad, and so I think it's important to go back to your loved ones, especially when we don't know when this will end. We don't know how bad it will get in all the countries.
The beginning of that report tells you that we didn't know when this is going to end. We still don't know when it's going to end. And Madam Kantara, you heard there people saying they're going back to their own countries, and also the report was saying that actually we were not as badly affected here as some of the countries they were running back to. But in a sense, is there any surprise that people wanted to go home and be with, as he said, their loved ones?
No, I don't think so. I think when a problem hits, you want to be close to your loved ones. You want to be close to your family. So it's normal. It's normal that you feel, even if you don't feel safer at home, you want to be with people that you love. I think it's important that they went back home. And as he rightly said, you don't know where it's going to, where the sickness is going to, and the health system there, it's in a much better position to protect you if you needed, to be protected. So I could understand.
And that's the point I was going to come to, actually, is that some of them in the extended version of that report were saying that, apart from anything else, we don't trust the health system. They weren't as rude or as blunt as that. But essentially, that's what they were saying, that I'm going somewhere where we have better healthcare provisions. So surely no surprise.
Absolutely, and for them, they were privileged that their governments could do that.
Sure.
How many other nationals in Africa, especially where their citizens are elsewhere, and have actually asked their governments to come and take them, but the governments couldn't do that. And these sort of things, they always show us up.
Yes.
And one hopes that one would derive the right energy from it and say, come on, enough is enough. Yeah. But you really cannot blame them, the uncertainty. And this is it. We've seen the US and UK and Western powers, whenever a problem erupts somewhere, fly in, take your citizens and leave. And whatever happens, happens. 1994 genocide quite demonstrates that we remember that.
Indeed,
so this is
absolutely,
it.
Yes, and also, one of the things, particularly from that report, is that because of what has happened subsequently, those people, some of them were working here, they still haven't come back. but also some of the ones we left were tourists.
Yes.
And that has greatly damaged the tourism industry in this country in a way that it's going to take a while to recover, surely.
Yes. I think, as we said, the mixed messaging, because I have some friends who said that actually they would have loved to come to Gambia,
right,
but they've had so much rumor and from the newspapers and from the news that coronavirus was on the rise in Gambia. And it was dangerous to be here. It was the second highest in Africa or something like that. I'm like, what? Where did you hear that? And so I think people were a bit frightened. Because obviously people were dying in their countries.
Indeed.
So therefore, you know, if Gambia was safe enough, they would come. But then they started hearing that coronavirus is in Gambia. But as we rightly said, I mean, if people are going to die, they want to die with their loved ones around them. They don't want to die in a foreign country and then have to be taken back. So it was better for them to stay. But actually, it has really damaged the tourist industry.
It
definitely.
Really
yes.
And I think, as I said, I think it will take a while to recover.
Yes.
But there you have it. I'm one of those people who my family in the UK were telling me, why don't you come back to the UK? And I said, no, I'll stay fine where I am, and I'm still here. And now on to another thing, something we had not become used to, and that was curfews, you know, time-limited curfews at which people were not meant to be out. Have a look at this clip with our colleague Babukar C.
A few people were intercepted, questioned, and those without valid reasons for being out were arrested and escorted to the nearest police station.
Better. What we will do, we will take you to the nearest station, okay? And when you get there, you have the right to your defense. Is that understood? Put on your mask, please.
Please forgive me.
Just put on your mask.
Please forgive me.
I understood. Just put on your mask.
Please forgive me.
Not in mask. He also is not in mask. And which we all know is a total violation of the regulation. So on that note, you have all the rights to a lawyer, to any other legal assistance that you might need.
Mr. Mboj, you heard there and you're smiling. This was an attempt at enforcement. Was it enforcement for the cameras, or did you think it was? Did you think it was truly effective?
You got me there when I was laughing. I said it seemed all staged and stuff. I suppose the important point there, I think, was that few people were out.
Yes.
That was the key. So most people really observed it. You're bound to have few here and there who wouldn't. And if you go by that, perhaps how they handled them, how the police handled them was not bad, even though in the end, as we was talking about taking to court, I'm not sure whether this was that sort of thing. You know what I mean? We want sometimes our police to be more facilitative than punitive.
I think I'm more informed because I think what he was telling there was incorrect information. But Kantara, I think also, as I said, leading into that story, this was unusual for us. We're not used to curfews. And so it wasn't a surprise that a few people broke it. But were you pleasantly surprised at how few people actually broke the curfew?
Yeah, in a way, I was surprised, but I was also not surprised because Gambia, I think that because it's not a highly developed society, we don't have too many activities at night. So a lot of people do not really go out that much at night. And so some people would because maybe they're walking or they enjoying themselves, you know, for an evening out. But most people would normally stay at home at a certain time in the night. So you know, I think very few people break the curfew. So which was good.
It was good, and as in the extended version of that report by our colleague Babukar C, what we heard about was they went to the areas where they thought there might be lots and lots of people, and to their surprise, they weren't, which supports what you're saying, Madam Kantara. So people observed the curfew for all sorts of reasons. I mean, we didn't get as drastic as happened in Rwanda, where on the second night of their curfew, 3 people who broke the curfew were shot and killed. But you can guess that after that nobody broke the curfew. But that was a bit drastic. And now on to another story which again like COVID was ubiquitous. Again defined the year and probably the years to come. What am I talking about? George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. Have a look at this.
For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, Mr. Chauvin kept his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. About 6 minutes into that period, George Floyd became non-responsive. The response to these images has shaken America to its core. 25 cities are under curfew as anger and protest at Mr. Floyd's death have grown. These protests seem different to the rest. Is it because we are living through a pandemic which has thrown a light on the disproportionate number of black people dying from it and the injustices of racism that has always been there? Former President Barack Obama said this should not happen in America in 2020. Sports stars including Serena Williams, basketball legend Michael Jordan, Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton all vented their anger and frustration. Responding to the incident, Serena Williams posted, "I am with a heavy heart," and Michael Jordan also expressed his anger and frustration about racism in the US, saying, "I am deeply saddened, truly pained and angry. I stand with those who are calling out the ingrained racism and violence toward people of color in our country. We have had enough."
George Floyd's death and the ripples and the repercussion and the ripple effect. Madam Kantara, I have struggled to actually enumerate why it was that this particular death was the one where people said, enough, we've had enough. Have you been able, in a kind of psychological, because it's affected the world?
Yeah, I think as you know, social media now, you know, captured everything.
Yes.
And the fact that this policeman had his hand in his pocket,
yes,
you know, in his pocket, means that this was a way to stress the knee on that man's neck.
Yes.
Yeah, the hand in the pocket was an indicator of the pressure that he had to put on the neck of the man. So his aim and objective was really to hurt him and to kill him. You know, you know, and people witnessing that, and then George Floyd crying for his mother, and saying, you know,
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And that I can't breathe said everything for America. Because, I mean, a lot of African Americans and a lot of people of color in America who have come across any kind of racism know that, I mean, they don't have a knee, I mean, the knee kind of is on their neck.
It's a
yes, so they cannot breathe.
Yeah.
You cannot breathe in a society like that.
And is that the sense you got from it? I mean, I grew up in England, and I was used to being stopped. And when the last car I had before I came to the Gambia was such a fancy car that I sold it very quickly. I got fed up of being stopped by the police, wanting to know what I was doing driving such a nice car. But metaphorically, that knee on the neck was the point, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And you asked earlier why this one exploded. But remember, there was Trayvon Martin. There were all sorts. So there was
Taylor shot in her own apartment.
Absolutely. Yes. And then suddenly this was, you know, pushed. It became worldwide. Everybody could see that. That really just, everybody just exploded. America is a very, it's a curious thing. Some people even do say that perhaps the Civil War divide is still there. And then perhaps with Trump, with his dog whistle politics, some people felt that it was emboldening these elements within to really be doing these things.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Civil War, because just last week I was reading that, you know, one of the things that President Trump had vetoed was that all the army barracks that are named after Southern Civil War generals and so on, they're going to change the names, and he has vetoed that. But of course he's not going to be around for much longer. But that divide was thrown into sharp focus by George Floyd's death, surely, wasn't it? That has existed in America for so long. And I think you made the point that kind of metaphorically, the knee was on the neck of people.
The knee is on the neck. I listened to Reverend Sharpton, and the funeral vigil that he gave. I mean, he was just saying, just get your knee, you're off our necks.
Sure.
You know? I mean, it's like, and he even used Barack Obama when he became president. The knee on his neck is where you even born in America? Where is your birth certificate? You have to prove that you were born here. So it's everything. I think that is why it sparked this worldwide, you know, condemnation of the whole thing. And as he rightly touched on, I think President Trump, being in power, empowered all of that. Because I lived in America for 12 years, and I've seen some minor form of racism. But when you are in campuses, it's very minimal that you come into contact with that. But nonetheless, if anybody told me that in 2020, I would be witnessing what I'm seeing in America right now, I would say, no, this is not possible. It's never going to happen. And we can see it happening. And but I think it was a rude awakening for everybody. And this Black Lives Matters is not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere, but Mr. Mboj, we saw Serena Williams there, we saw Lewis Hamilton, and just 2 days ago, or a week ago after he won the BBC Sports Personality of the Year, he said this has given him a voice, and he's going to use it. And we saw more of that, didn't we, from sports stars?
Absolutely, and one would be tempted here to ask how much of this Black Lives Matter movement contributed to Trump's defeat.
Yes, quite.
So it might seem as if their interventions had some effect.
Sure.
And this is it, we are living in this age, so we want people like that. These opinion influencers, we call them, need them more, to be more crusading as they have been here, and towards good causes. This is a way of creating this power against the awful state that can be sometimes, or the other centers of power that are here to exploit and do nasty things to people.
Yeah, really good point. And Naomi Osaka, yes.
I think I just wanted to add on to that. I think that out of every bad situation, something good comes out. And what came out of Floyd's situation is the fact that a lot of African Americans came out to vote.
Yes,
because they felt, they didn't need to vote. Nothing is going to change.
Yeah,
but this time they really,
it
galvanized them to come out. And as you rightly said, it contributed to the defeat of Trump, definitely.
And my own theory on that is that one of the reasons why it contributed to Trump's defeat is that Fox News, which is very supportive of Trump, kept referring to it as the Black Lives Matter More movement. It's not that our lives matter more. It's our lives matter too.
Yes.
That's what the point is.
Yes,
and they've missed that point. And that probably angered some people. But thank you both for that. And on to something else. A talking point across the nation. Expectations were high. High for what? A new constitution. It didn't happen. Have a look at this.
These are the results. The ayes 31, the noes 23.
Members had voted to reject a new constitution by the narrowest of margins. For the bill to have survived through to a further reading, it needed 42 members to vote in its favor, but it never came close to achieving that. On the announcement of the results, there were more dramatic scenes as those on the winning side briefly left the chamber to celebrate their victory. Over the course of the day and a half of debates, streamed live to audiences around the world, members had reason to say their piece for and against the draft constitution.
People rose to say for and against the draft constitution. Madam Kantara, I and Mr. Mboj, we went through with a fine-tooth comb because we were going to be discussing the draft constitution on his program Drive Time. And I have to be honest, the rejection of it was one of the things that saddened me, even in what is a very sad and saddening year. What are your own thoughts on when you heard that it had been rejected, and did you think it was going to be?
I was almost sure that it would be rejected. And the reason for that is because as human beings, when we go through something, the tendency is, the expectations are that, change is very difficult. Let's put it that way. Quite. Change is very, very difficult. So I was definitely not surprised that it was rejected, because I knew that, the anticipated change that was going to happen was just not going to happen overnight. It was not going to happen overnight because we didn't have the, as we rightly said about, the groundwork. We didn't, the groundwork, because basically if people are not knowledgeable about what they are doing, are they going to be able to do it? They won't be able to do it. And so it would just come up again to those lines of voting. I'm not voting for this because I really believe in it. I'm voting for it because it is with
Yes, yes. The groundwork, the Constitutional Review Commission, we're very disappointed to hear that. They didn't just go nationally, they went internationally to try and get some consensus. What are your own thoughts on that?
This is it. I mean, when you said that whether the groundwork was done, I felt that these people had not only consulted, the length and breadth of this country, they had even gone international. So this was a curious case that these people had presented what they call the People's Constitution, this draft at least. But again, we have the representatives of the people who disagree with them in a funny kind of way. And when you listen to the debates, as we did, I mean, the objections, they were pointing out here and there certain provisions that they didn't like. Then one wonders, what was the consultation done between the CRC and the National Assembly members? What's going on here? So then you begin to be more cynical about what's going on. Some people have said that the president didn't like it, didn't want the draft, didn't push it enough to go through because of what they call the retroactive nature of the tenure.
But that was only one part of it. Was that worth rejecting the whole thing just because of something like that?
Absolutely. And then even when we go back to the beginning, this CRC thing spent so much money. I mean, one had the impression that immediately they give it to the president, not long after it will be subject to referendum. The tiny bit about the draft going through the National Assembly, which will be subject to a vote, really nobody really considered that part.
Almost as if they thought it would be a rubber stamp by the National Assembly because they consulted so widely.
Absolutely. So the whole strategy, there are still things one really quite doesn't understand how this whole thing sort of unfolded.
And yet we had assembly member after assembly member saying, I'm raising these objections because these are objections that have been passed through to me by my constituents. And so that was the kind of how they were couching it. Whether you believe that or not is another matter, but that's what many of them said, certainly. But for the moment, we still have the 1997 Constitution, which is the one we had before.
Yes. And
very sad. Recent attempts at revival.
Well, this is it. I mean, they've tried to revive it. Goodluck Jonathan, former Nigerian president, has come here, and that's not worked. So it's going to be interesting to see because unless certain things are changed, they can't push the same one through and hope that somehow assembly members have changed their mind. Surely, can they?
I doubt it. I think that a lot of people have been consulted, but do people even, because I attended one of these meetings and a lot of people who you even expect to understand certain things did not understand. So I'm just looking at people, local people. Would they understand the importance of this and even why we had to change the constitution and for the betterment of the country? It's very difficult. I mean, they would have to. It's a lot of work to get people to understand the importance of this, because if we don't have this in place, there can be a repetition of what happened before.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think a point I must make here in kind of a self-interested point is that I was one of the people asked to do a translation of the kind of summary of the Constitution into, they did all the local language and they did Creole for the Aku community, and I did that. But I must admit at the time I thought it was a bit late in the day. They should have done it at the beginning rather than at the end of the whole process. And this was just a matter of weeks or so before people voted. So perhaps that's something to look at. And yes, you said very, very wisely there, did they consult National Assembly members? Perhaps not. We'll take another quick commercial break, and when we come back we'll have 3 more stories immediately after, and then 3 more stories later on. So 6 more stories. Don't go away. Join us after this break.
From an early age, we value the feeling of speed, the thrill of the wind as we rush to our destinations. The feel of our feet bounding over the ground. The way the world blurs as we rush by. Faster, faster than a ray of light, I'm flying. I have one speed, I have one gear. Keep on moving, I won't stop till I get there. Want to experience speed? Then subscribe to the Gambia's 4G LTE mobile network, QCell. With speeds of up to 45 megabytes per second, you can get online in the blink of an eye. The fastest browsing, stream videos faster, do much more faster. Just dial *335# to join the fastest club. QCell's 4G LTE mobile network. Go faster. For more information, call 111. QCell, Senior Boss. We innovate, others follow.
Welcome back. You're watching QTV's Look Back on the year 2020, and we're doing so through various news stories. And with me, I have Madam Fatou Kine Kantara from the UTG, lecturer in psychology. And I also have Mr. Mboj, a colleague here at QTV. Now, I said this had been a very interesting year and one that people would remember for all sorts of reasons. The next story is again another reason why we will remember the year. The president had said, you know, he would serve 3 years and stand down. Not only did he not do that, he formed his own political party. Have a look at this.
Finally, it was the president's turn. President Barrow told his supporters that his government will bring developments to the region. Speaking in local languages, the president promised to solve the electricity needs of villages without electricity in the region, claiming that $40 million have already been secured from China for that project. The NPP party leader acknowledges Hamad N. Keba, Henry Gomez, and the diaspora for supporting his political ambition. In the 2021 presidential elections, Mr. Barrow hopes that it will be a political contest out of which he will emerge victorious. Campaigning for the 2021 elections begin next year, when more than 10 political parties will prepare for the presidential race, canvassing votes from the electorate who will decide who should be at the helm of steering the future direction of the country.
There you heard our colleague Mahmoud Lamin Choi. Madam Kantara, was it any surprise that the president did not step down after 3 years?
No. It was not a surprise because I think that something went wrong along the line. You know? I mean, there are, again, a lot of mixed messaging.
Sure.
I mean, this was agreed with, and then I think that one of the political leaders came out and said that, you know, if anybody talks about this, then they will be taken to court. So once you say that, you're opening the gate for something else.
Indeed.
And so therefore, again, you know, I always say that, you know, in psychology, you always have to look at the human mind, the mind of the person, because you can decide that this is what you're going to do, but it's always important to think about what the other person is going to do.
Indeed.
And indeed, I was not surprised that Barrow wanted to stay longer, and I was not surprised that he formed a political party also. Because if somebody wants this, why not me? I'm human, I'm already here. So, you know, if they can do it, I can do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And when that deal was done behind closed doors, is that one of the things they overlooked? That the incumbent might decide that actually there's not a proper framework for somebody doing that sort of thing. It's all very nice that politicians amongst themselves decide that this is what we're going to do, but really the Constitution doesn't really allow for that, unless the person is sick, infirm, or something, for them to step down.
Absolutely. So one is wondering, was there sort of a lack of foresight as to the potential, you know, playing out, you know, eventuality of these things? I think we were in a hurry. I don't think many people really gave much consideration to that sort of thing. The overriding priority for the country was just to get rid of President Jammeh, wasn't it? So this is it. This is what happens. So you agree on 3 years, you agree on anything. But some of us, we sort of suspected that he might not, you know, experience triumphing over idealism. Ideally, that's what we all want. But our experience with people and power, we knew that was highly unlikely. I mean, we were taking bets for the coalition. Okay, how long before it disintegrates? Yes, you know, so with my friends, you know,
because they were also
journalists,
unlikely bedfellows that came together to form that coalition.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So sometimes I get people telling me, I mean, the coalition, they failed. I'm like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. That was really one priority, to get rid of Yahya Jammeh.
Exactly.
So now we're going to have to pay the price for that emergency we had, and we had to put in this measure to get out of it.
Yeah,
and there's a price to pay. Now we're paying the price.
And in a kind of more sophisticated political system in the United Kingdom, when Tony Blair had done this deal with Gordon Brown, that after winning 3 elections, he would step down. People felt insulted. They said the prime ministership is not something you hand around to each other. Like when I get tired, I can hand it. I mean, and they made the Labour Party pay for it.
Yes.
Bitterly.
Absolutely.
Like, no, don't take us for granted to that extent. If we elect you as the leader of the party, then stay for your term.
Yes.
And when we want to vote you out, we will vote you out.
Vote you out, yes.
But, that deal did irreparable damage to the Labour Party.
Absolutely.
And we talk about a coalition, and as Mr. Mboj says, there was one priority, one main priority. That had been achieved.
Absolutely.
And suddenly, once that had been achieved, then everything else was up in the air, was it?
Yes, it was up in the air, Because I remember somebody saying, no, this man is not interested. I said, there's nothing like somebody is not interested in something, or somebody is interested in something. There are situations and circumstances that determine things. So we'll watch and see, but I doubt, because as I said, the aim was not, and this is even why the Constitution failed also, because the focus was on one thing, and one thing was get rid of this man.
That's right.
Yeah, the focus was on not on that, what happens after he leaves. What happens after he leaves. So in a way, we have sort of.
Yes, and it's interesting, if we go back to the Constitution matter, some people were saying that one of the reasons they rejected it was because they were kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. They said some of the good things from the 97 Constitution were completely rejected because it was in the 1997 Constitution, and that they should have been included in the draft, but they weren't. I mean, of course, famously, the head of the army came out and said, you can't define the army's role in just 2 sentences in the new constitution, where for all its faults, the previous one went into paragraphs defining the role of the army, although that was abused, but at least it tried to define it in more than 2 sentences. So,
and whether now the fact that we are still being governed under the 1997 constitution, should we be scared? I do not know. No. Because there was so much power with the executive. That much we know. Whether he uses it or not, that would depend on his discretion. But again, I'm not sure whether we want to live like that as a society.
No, but interestingly, I mean, one of the things that people rejected was that they felt that they knew the draft, it sort of handcuffed the president. He had to go to the assembly for approval for almost everything. Even if he wanted to blow his nose,
Remember, we discussed that during drive time. We said that I'm not so sure, for instance, with his cabinet, that he has to go to the National Assembly members to approve. I mean, a cabinet, that's really, you should let that. He should do that. Let the person choose. Really.
Because, again, we were drafting a constitution based on the person who had been the previous as a reaction to him.
Absolutely.
Rather than as something that was beneficial for the country. But quickly, from both of you, first to you, Mr. Mboj, one of the things that we've seen since the NPP was registered, let's not forget, it's not actually officially launched yet. Lots of people are already deserting their parties to join.
Absolutely.
Typical of Africa, is it not?
The magnetism of incumbency. Absolutely. Everybody would go. It's got the advantage. That's and you know the way they campaign. If you vote for my party, I will bring in development, roads, electricity, and all the rest of it. We listened in Nyamina West, where they were using this language of, if you're in opposition, you've been in opposition for so long, you're never going to have this, you're never going to have that. We thought that, oh my God, really. Distorted politics, completely distorted there.
And you, any surprise that so many people were, as we say in Africa, crossing the carpet to join a party that's not even launched yet?
Incumbents are very difficult to defeat. It's always been the case. Because they have the power, they have the means, they have everything to their advantage. So, I mean, if you want a piece of the cake,
you have to join the bandwagon, as it were, for mixing our metaphors there. But I'm sure you know what we mean. On to something else. When the search towards the middle of the year started ramping up around getting a COVID-19 vaccine, you would have seen articles on a daily basis saying, how is Africa going to cope? How are they going to get it? Is anybody going to give it to Africa? Well, some African nations weren't waiting for that. Have a look.
Some African countries have decided what they cannot afford is to wait for a handout from anyone. To this end, a network of 13 African countries has joined forces with global researchers to launch the largest clinical trial of potential COVID-19 treatments on the continent. It is called the Anti-Cove study and involves Antwerp's Institute of Tropical Medicine and 12 other international research institutions from various countries. In addition to the 13 African countries, there are 26 partners involved. These non-African partners are from Switzerland, Spain, Germany, France and Belgium. The research aims to identify treatments that can be used to treat mild and moderate cases of COVID-19 early and prevent spikes in hospitalization that could overwhelm fragile and already overburdened health systems in Africa.
Fragile systems might be overburdened. But in the lead up to that, I said, you know, people had been kind of worrying about us and saying, how are they going to get it? But as we heard there, 13 African countries, including our neighbor Senegal, they didn't wait. They thought, let us start to... This is a good sign of the fact that this thing has forced us to cooperate in a way that we've not done before.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that was very, very encouraging. Getting together to do that, when I read that in the papers and saw that on TV, I was really impressed with that. That, you know, at least they didn't wait. I mean, as usual, we always wait for the West to give us handouts. But this time they were taking the initiative, which I think was very good and encouraging.
And did it also show that actually we have the expertise across our continent?
Yes.
And if we have the expertise, why are we not actually saying, okay, let's do it ourselves, rather than, as Madam Kantara says, waiting for handouts?
That's exactly it. So what you find is that with most of these international agencies, you go there, you'll see maybe a Sierra Leonean here, Nigerian there, a Ghanaian there. We are all sort of, we go over there to sort their problems out. But this is it. Now we are being shown that perhaps we have to be more inward looking in finding solutions to our problems.
Sure.
You know what I mean? We have the expertise. It's just that organizationally, as a state, somehow we've been failing in this. But this is it. Once in a while, something will come along that will remind you that really you need to be self-sufficient in many ways.
And did that mantra of, you know, when, if, are we ever going to give it to Africa, did that actually prick us into saying, well, listen to what they're saying, let's not wait? Do you think that had something to galvanize us into doing what these 13 countries ended up doing?
I think so. I think so. And I think that, you know, the fact that people didn't know how far this illness is going to go, what is going to happen, what's going to happen to us. And as we rightly say, our fragile health system, it's better we go a step ahead before anything happens, because what is happening in this in the West, if it happens here, I mean, it would be disaster for us.
Well, this is it.
It would be disaster. So I think that is why, you know, these people coming together and doing this. And not only that, I've noticed also that a lot of young people are really now interested in science and medicine. And, you know, they start talking about it. I was really surprised because everybody's saying, I need to study, I need to be a doctor, I need to, you know, I'm like, this is really good. You know, I mean, I remember watching that or reading that on the internet with my granddaughter, and my granddaughter was saying, it is very important to study medicine because just in case something happens, we can help ourselves. We can do something to help Gambia. I said, yes, that's, you see, it's very important.
It is important. And a precursor to this, as I said at the beginning of the show, we can't cover every story, but one of the big stories was that we felt we'd found an African cure in Madagascar.
Yes.
But that turned out to be a damn squib. I mean, their numbers kind of eventually went through the roof. In spite of that, the president has gone as recently as last week, saying they tried to bribe him with 20 million to put something toxic in it, and he's withdrawn his country from the World Health Organization. People are now questioning his sanity. But for a moment or two, it raised the prospect. Even we here in the Gambia were given some of it. We first to Guinea-Bissau and then here. And we did try and find out whether it was administered and what. We never got to the bottom of it. But were you, like myself and others, thinking, here's something which has come from a kind of natural root? It's an African one, and it might be the cure. Were your hopes raised? I must be honest, I was skeptical from day one.
My hopes were never raised at all. Remember when we discussed it, then we thought that some of these countries, we are politicizing something.
Yeah.
First, let us consider the science.
Yes.
The politics can come later. But this is essentially a scientific issue. What do other experts say? Has it been peer reviewed? We know that this is how science works. But none of that, we didn't see any of that. I mean, even afterwards, remember, even Russia also mentioned something, but nobody could have access to their information. One couldn't judge. So I was never taken in. Of course, politically, we all wish that Africa, somewhere in Africa, will come up with a vaccine. Of course, we want it. But I did not want it to the point that I will sacrifice my sanity.
Yes, I'm glad you made that point, because when I was having the argument with some colleagues in the office, I thought, okay, let me take you to the press conference where the president announces this. I said, I won't preempt what you're going to see and hear. Listen for yourself. And he said 2 people had been cured using it. And I said, what sensible scientific, if this wasn't something that we wanted badly as Africans, would you say only 2 people have been cured?
Exactly.
And then you use that as a badge to say, no, it was a nonsense.
I didn't, I don't know, maybe, well, I kept saying maybe this medicine is good for something else.
Yes,
but for COVID, I think that this is a tall order. I don't think that,
it really was. They'd used it for malaria and so on, and apparently it's been quite effective. But for COVID.
For COVID,
And as the figures in Madagascar continue to show, even at the point of doing this program, they kind of went through the roof, and they still have their, their medicine, but it's not working. So on to our next story. We talked about COVID, and I was saying in the office just last week that I know more people who have died this year than any year, and I'm 65 years old, so I've lived long. So, that means, I've known many years, but this year has kind of exceeded all. Here, a couple, or 2 or 3. Have a look.
Away we go with the Gambia centering the ball. South Hartubiri now.
He has no match in the annals of football in the Gambia, and to this day he is the only player to have scored all 3 goals against Senegal in what would be the country's only away win against their neighbours and rivals at senior level in 1963. Because of his undoubted dribbling skills, his friend and former international teammate Alhaji Babu Sow goes one step further in his praise for the former Sevilla player. A class biri-biri even above Maradona because he was a great goal scorer, dribbler and could play with both feet, so told BBC Sports in 2005. Described by many as a likeable person, George Gomez was born on the 19th of September 1938. He is known in both sports, education, entertainment, and religious circles. In sports, he has left an indelible mark both as an athlete and administrator. He was an athlete competing in long-distance running for his former school, St. Augustine's High School. He would later play football, playing for the Gambian national team between 1960 to 1964. George became the executive secretary of the Gambian National Olympic Committee from 1991 to 2010.
Bishop Emeritus of Banjul, Michael Joseph Cleary, served the Gambia for 25 years, and he was entrusted with teaching, governing and sanctifying the faithful of his diocese, sharing these duties with the priests and deacons who served under him. He also conducted the sacrament of Holy Orders. Bishop Cleary spent most of his life in the Gambia, and he built most of the modern Catholic churches in the Gambia today.
There you had just 3. In the Gambia alone, we could have had 10 or a dozen, and around the world a lot more. As I said, a year like no other. Can I just ask, did you know any of the three that we featured there?
Yes, Father Cleary, everybody knows Father Cleary, yes. And Beery,
Yes,
you
yes,
know, Gomez.
Gomez.
These are people you cannot miss in the society,
Sure.
yes, yeah. Yeah, it was a sad news to hear about
Sure.
their deaths, definitely. I remember in school days, you know, everybody knew about Father Cleary,
Right.
whether you went to St. Augustine's or not, or whether you were a Catholic or not, you just knew about him. He was, you know, he served this country.
Sure. And it was ironic that in the one about Biri Biri, we mentioned Maradona.
Yeah.
Little did we know that
He also
a few
passed away, yeah.
weeks later, a couple of
Yeah.
months later, he would also
Yeah.
pass away. And in fact, we then found lots of lovely pictures, which we hadn't at the time, of the two of them together.
Absolutely.
And the same question, did you know on a personal, certainly Gomez, I knew very well. And we'd even worked together in London a couple of times when he'd gone there to MC shows to do with Gambian independence and so on. He and I had worked on the same stage. And so that's how I got to know him. Well, for you, how familiar were you? I know you're a former pupil of St. Augustine's,
Yes.
of course.
so Father Cleary then, he taught me general paper.
Ah, right.
So I've been in his class.
Right.
So we knew that and how much he took interest in the students and this style.
Mm.
You see, some people think that education is about putting things into you. No, he was the one who would spark things.
Right, right.
And that's the
right.
other part that would make you think,
Yeah.
you know. So he was fantastic. I love him as my teacher in general paper. And when Biri is family, but that's not the thing. As a footballer, we didn't know Biri here, but I remember in 1987, I was just listening to the BBC.
Right.
And then suddenly there was a 15-minute program on Biri Biri. I said, whoa, that was a shock to me.
Right, right.
You know, that was the opener.
A Gambian
A Gambian
player.
in
Yeah.
Sevilla, and the song Biri Biri, they had a song for him.
That's right.
He was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, Gambia produced something like that when nobody else did. Small Gambia, small Banjul for that matter. Remarkable human being, extraordinary. His achievements in the
And
end.
you know, when we did the tribute, I remember saying to my colleagues in the office who were much younger than myself, I said, what you don't realize is that there are tributes across Africa. Because he's one of the first African players who made that kind of mark to play for Sevilla and become a legend there.
Yeah.
You know, others are following in his footsteps, and none of them have as yet risen to those heights where they could be called a legend of a club in Spain, Italy, or England.
Absolutely.
And yet, you know, here he is. But you know, in the intro, I said this has been a year like no other. I myself lost a first cousin who was 6 years younger than myself to COVID. And I was telling Mr. Mbo just before we came on here, I mean, a friend of mine died 2 weeks ago at Accra airport, getting ready to board a plane. He'd had complications linked to COVID and so on, but it was a heart attack that killed him. And then another friend died 2 days later, and his wife died 5 days later.
Oh.
I mean, it's been, and I could name many, many more. So it's been that kind of strange sort of year
definitely.
for you know, the number of deaths that one knows on a personal level.
Definitely.
But if we take the kind of COVID impact, you were talking about the fear. And so on. You know, we heard stories of, you know, can't happen in Africa, doesn't happen to young people, it's people above a certain age. All of that was kind of swept away because the figures that started coming out showed that it was no respecter of age.
Of age or anything,
And so people were just, you know, succumbing to it, really. But in a general sense, do you get the feeling that, it's a difficult question, I know, if I had to say what kind of general lessons have we learned from how it has impacted us, what would you say they were?
I think that we take life for granted. I think that we, you know, I mean, we know that death is inevitable.
Sure.
But I think that COVID had a rude awakening to all of us. I mean, people are a lot more careful about, you know, about where they go, what they eat, and you know, how they even dress. So, I mean, people are very, very careful now and more aware of washing their hands and hygiene. And, you know, everybody talks about it. And I noticed that even small children, you know, in my neighborhood, you know, would say, I'm washing my hands, I'm washing my hands, which is very good. So everybody is aware of that, which is, you know, more aware. It was something that we had to do anyway, but COVID brought this out. And I think that it brought a lot of unity among people also, you know, because I think that people are more gelled together and more aware that we are all in this together.
Yes, yes.
We are all in this together.
And yours?
Yes, significant point there, because how I looked at it afterwards was that there were certain people, kids of a certain generation, I mean, not quite sophisticated enough to think about conspiracy theories and all of that. They've been learning something entirely different.
Sure.
I mean, you can have adults who didn't care, they were skeptical, wear this or wear that. But this is that you've got lots of stories like that. Kids, they will say, no, they're going to wash their hands, even social distancing. So new vocabulary has sort of entered their world. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So for me, when I'm thinking about change, it's about the younger generation. I mean, old dogs, you're going to teach us new tricks, and we are gone. But the younger generation, what they are taking from it. So I felt that was a good thing.
Okay, thanks for you, both of you for that. And for myself, certainly the hygiene. Is something that I think is something that we should embrace and carry forward. And it forced us actually, as Madam Kantara says, think about, you know, how connected we are with each other. Although I remember writing an article at the beginning of it saying that in Africa this is one of the most difficult things because this is the continent that doesn't know social distancing. And we were forced to address that. So we've learned a lot. And now we'll take another quick commercial break, and when we come back, our final 3 stories. Don't go away. Join us after this break.
This December, get a massive discount on all Samsung products. Samsung is offering up to 40% discount on refrigerators, deep freezers, washing machines, digital inverter air conditioners, television sets, mobile phones, and all Samsung home appliances. All products brought from our brand shops have 1-year manufacturer warranty. Don't miss out on our Samsung mega sales. Visit our brand shops at QCell's building along Caraba Avenue or at Bruce B Turntable. Call us on 33-33217 for more information. These promos end on 31st December. Samsung, imagine.
Welcome back. Once again, you're watching QTV's review, and we're looking back over the year 2020. Quite an amazing, tumultuous year. And we're on to our final 3 stories. This one is not about COVID. And in fact, in a sense, the next 3 are not about COVID, although one has a slightly tenuous link to it. The TRRC, I could have chosen one of 10 subjects. So this one is just a kind of primer to get us talking about the TRRC generally. Have a look at this.
The institutions didn't have the effect, policy mandates to carry out whatever they were supposed to do. And relying mostly on domestic and foreign borrowing.
You heard there Professor Sen, and in the sort of headline it said, you know, Gambians were complicit, and it also mentions about comparing him to Amin and Hitler. Madam Kantara, the TRRC, when it started, I had newly moved to the Gambia, and it's showed Gambians a side of themselves that they could not believe. From a psychological point of view as well. Are you surprised that people refuse to believe some of what they heard, even though the witnesses appear to be credible?
Yeah, because you know, it sort of exposed all of us. Because you know, I mean, when you listen to the TRRC and people say, "Wow, this happened," I said, "Yeah, but these people did not fall from the sky. They are part of us. They are part of us. So if they can do it, then it means that maybe we can do it." And that is the frightening part of it all. And I think people were a bit worried about that when I said that in some of my classes. And people were saying, but madam, I said, yeah, everybody is capable of doing something. It just depends on the power of the situation.
That's right.
The power of the situation. And so, you know, I think that some of the stories that we had, it's just like some of these things happen behind closed doors.
Indeed, indeed.
And things are still happening behind closed doors. But when it comes out to the public like that, and people were sitting tuned to their radio and listening and watching live on TV, it just brings out the reality of it. It makes it really real. And so I think that that was, you know, a difficult thing to swallow about ourselves, a difficult truth, yes.
And for you, Mr. Mboch, I mean, I'm slightly an outsider in this, in that I started coming here on a regular basis around 1992. And so every year up to the time you took over, and then subsequently I would come at least, you know, once a year. I'd come here and Sierra Leone. So I was never immersed in the society, but I saw enough on occasions when I stayed here for 4 or 5 weeks to see how people would say to me, oh, be careful what you say around that person, they work for the NIA or something. I find it really strange. I wasn't used to that in Sierra Leone, I wasn't used to it in England. But for you, as somebody who's Gambian, and how did those revelations hit you?
Absolutely, particularly Professor Sen's testimony. You know, he was one of the most cerebral of the witnesses that appeared, because being, of course, a university professor. So his understanding, he studied the situation, didn't simply read what was going on, he studied it. So quite interesting insights there. Our complicity, I mean, we've long been told, you know, in political circles, that openly, you see, that people are complicitous in many ways in their own subjugation. I have to tell you, from 1994, I haven't quite recovered from my shock. Overnight, how many people were just converting, going to support this new, the young boys from the army. Because you would ask people, do you think that the former president was rigging elections? You know, what is going on? We have a settled constitutional way of changing government. What is the need of using this extrajudicial ways of changing? And history wasn't on our side. Everywhere we had seen the army in Africa, it wasn't a happy story. So there was a lot going against it. Well, we didn't see it, so we had to learn. It was a dreadful experience we had. But we've learned something. Without courage, you're not going to get liberty. We've long been taught that. When you look at the Jannah Commission, people who were coming, well, I was ordered to do this, I was ordered to do that. Never mind what your term of reference said. They didn't have the courage to say no.
The kind of the Nuremberg
absolutely.
defense which was thrown out.
I think that has to do a lot with the socialization we have in this country, looking at it from a psychological perspective. Because it's easy to say that, why did this person not say no? Why did this person behave like that? But why did that happen in the first place? How are we socialized in our homes in terms of obedience? What are we I mean, this is deep-rooted. This is deep-rooted. It has nothing to do with the fact that people are just we are, you know, I mean, people are socialized to agree to things, you know, whether they like it or not. And this sort of lethargic way of looking at everything is something that is ingrained in Gambian society, to a point that you are not allowed to, I mean, to think critically. You cannot think critically. You cannot, because you cannot say, well, I disagree with this. If you disagree with that, it means that you are an outsider, or you are against somebody. You are not against somebody. You're just against a point of view. But we don't train our children at home, and we don't train them in the schools, in the school system, to think critically.
And be
we don't train them to be assertive. So if you don't have these qualities, then how are you going to be able to question issues around you? It's very difficult.
Absolutely.
Very difficult.
Spot on, and from somebody in education. And unfortunately, we have one more story. I was going to bring you another one, but we don't have time. And it's to do with sports. But watch this, Gambia, Gabon, but then we'll expand on sports. Have a quick look.
The Gambia had to win against Gabon to have any chance of qualification to make it to their maiden AFCON final. One more win in their final 2 matches will secure their qualification. But the question is, can they do it?
Now, Gambia, Gabon. I mentioned that because if you saw the picture in the background there, you would have seen empty stands. Madam Kantara, on a normal, such a high profile qualifying, the stands would have been full to bursting. But again, COVID forced us to actually have empty stands, and talked about the impact on everything. Sports was no exception. The entertainment industry, everything suffered. If we use that as a kind of look back, as a kind of analogy for the empty stands on what the impact was on what are your thoughts generally on how COVID has impacted us as people and as a nation, either on an individual basis or just kind of in the wider context?
Yeah, it has actually forced us into isolation. I think that a lot of people are now we are a society that like to intermingle, and we still do to a certain extent, but I think people are more careful about going to places and doing things and being in activity, which is very difficult for Africa. It's difficult for other countries, but it's more difficult for us here because of the nature of how we live and how we interact with one another. So COVID have really, break out something in us that we didn't even realize could happen. I mean, people are like, having to stay away from sports.
Well, that's right, and sporting arena. I mean, Mr. Mboj, Liverpool fan, some of us who supported Manchester United hoped the Premier League season would be cancelled and Liverpool wouldn't get there. But on a more serious note, it impacted sport, as Madam Kantara said. We like to be sociable. We would have loved to have filled the stadium to bursting and cheered on our lads to victory against Gabon. It was not to be. It really has decimated. It led to the cancellation of the league here in the Gambia, not a postponement, but a cancellation. Can we recover from that?
Yes, let me just begin with the Gajaka's report, his last question. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Yes, we can, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just thinking there, life is really a team sport.
Sure.
When you want us to do it individually, or it just doesn't work. So obviously it has taken something that ambience, that feeling you get when the stadium is full, and even it will affect your performance psychologically. We all know that. So that's it. I think that's why people really can't wait for the vaccine. Hopefully, so that we could go back to some kind of normalcy. How things would pan out. We do not know what would change forever. What has happened now that will entail a longer term change in us, we do not quite know yet. In time we will know.
In time we will know. I think that's a brilliant point to end on. And I'd just like to say thank you to my two guests. First of all, to Madam Fatou Kiné Kantara, thank you so much. And thank for your insights. And to you, Mr. Mboj, thank you also. And to the viewers, as I said, this is a slightly longer one than usual, but thanks for being with us, and thanks for being with QTV. And until next year, which we hope will be a much better year than this one, it can hardly be worse. Thanks for watching QTV. Bye-bye for now.